They called her Barren. They forced her into a marriage where love was forbidden, where silence was her only companion. But 3 years later, when she returned with Triplets, the miracle everyone swore was impossible, every heart froze, especially his. What happens when the girl the world rejected comes back holding the future in her arms? If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The first time Amara heard the word Barren, it wasn't from a doctor, but from her own aunt. She was only 16, overhearing whispers after a childhood illness left her weak for months. No man will want her, the aunt had said, shaking her head as though Amara were not in the next room. Those words grew roots in her heart, and no matter how many times she tried to silence them, they followed her into every glance, every pitying smile, every silence that stretched too long. Now, at 22, those whispers had dragged her into the one place she never imagined she would stand, a billionaire's wedding aisle. The grand hall glittered with chandeliers imported from Italy, their light catching on diamond-studded vases filled with roses. Guests in gowns worth more than her family's entire home leaned in to gossip, their eyes darting toward her plain face and simple gown. She wasn't ugly, no. Her beauty was soft, natural, unpainted. But compared to the icy models and heiresses in attendance, she was invisible, laughable except for the fact that she was the bride. Her groom, Adrian Cole, stood at the altar like a statue carved from marble. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that could have been chiseled from stone, he was every woman's dream and every dreamer's nightmare. He wore his wealth the way others wore oxygen, naturally, effortlessly. His tailored suit, the faint gleam of his watch, even the way he held his chin high, it all screamed power. But his eyes never once met hers. They had told her the marriage was necessary. His parents, desperate for a merger deal with her uncle's small but resourceful company, had pushed it. Her uncle, drowning in debts, had insisted. "It's just marriage," he'd said. "Better than hunger, Amara. Think of your mother, your siblings." And so she thought of them now as she walked toward Adrian, clutching a bouquet so tightly the thorns bit into her skin. She didn't flinch. Pain was no stranger. The priest's voice echoed. "Do you take this man?" Her heart beat so loudly she almost missed Adrian's flat reply. "I do." No smile, no warmth, just an obligation. When it was her turn, she swallowed the lump in her throat. I do." The applause was polite, brittle. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "Poor thing. Doesn't he know she can't give him children?" Another chuckled, low and cruel. Adrian's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Not to defend her. Not to claim her. Nothing at all. The kiss that sealed the vows was no kiss at all, just a brief brush of air, as though his lips refused to touch hers. The humiliation seared her like fire, but she lifted her chin. If life had taught her anything, it was to endure. That night, as fireworks exploded above the mansion's gardens, Amara sat alone in a gilded bedroom that wasn't hers, staring out at a world that sparkled too brightly for her tired eyes. She heard laughter downstairs, Adrian's voice mingling with friends, the clinking of glasses. Not once did he come to her. Not once did he acknowledge she was there. In that silence, she whispered to herself, "Endure, Amara. Just endure." But deep inside, a part of her asked, how long can a heart endure being unwanted? The morning after the wedding, Amara awoke to a silence that pressed heavy against her chest. The sheets beside her were untouched, crisp as though no one had ever laid there. Adrian had not come to her, not even stepped foot in the room after the ceremony. For a moment she lay there staring at the ornate ceiling painted with gold vines and cherubs. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty could also be a prison. She could almost hear her mother's voice whispering through memory. "You are more than what they say, Amara. Don't let the world name you barren when God has not spoken yet." But those words, however comforting once, felt hollow now. When she finally rose, she dressed simply in a soft cream dress and tied her hair back. The mansion was a labyrinth of polished marble, sweeping staircases, and long hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. As she walked down toward the dining hall, she could feel eyes on her, the servants pausing in their work, whispering in corners. "Such a shame," one maid murmured as she dusted a vase. "The poor girl won't last here." "She's not fit for him," another replied. "No children, no beauty for society, why else would he marry her but for business?" Amara's steps faltered, but she kept her head high. She'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't given, it was carried. In the grand dining hall, Adrian sat at the head of the table, scanning through papers while sipping black coffee. His posture was impeccable, his suit already in place as though he hadn't just married yesterday, but was preparing for another battle in the boardroom. "Good morning," she said softly. He glanced up only briefly, then returned to his papers. "Morning?" No smile, no warmth, just a word, sharp as glass. The table stretched long between them, filled with foods she had only ever seen in magazines, fluffy croissants, fruits glistening like jewels, silver dishes steaming with eggs and sausages. Yet she had no appetite. She sat quietly, buttering bread she couldn't taste. "Your uncle will be joining us later," Adrian said suddenly, not looking at her. "We'll discuss the new contract. You should be present." She hesitated. "Do you want me to say anything?" His eyes finally lifted to hers, dark and unreadable. "No, just sit. Look like my wife." The words stung, but she nodded. He returned to his papers as though she no longer existed. Hours later, when her uncle arrived with Adrian's parents, the atmosphere thickened. Adrian's mother, Evelyn Cole, was regal in a silk dress, her diamonds flashing like stars. She swept her gaze over Amara with cool disdain. "So this is the girl," Evelyn said, not bothering to hide her tone. "Thin, quiet, I suppose she's polite enough." Her uncle shifted uneasily. "Amara is strong." "Strong?" Evelyn's lips curved in a smile that wasn't a smile. "Strength will not give my son heirs." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Mother." But Evelyn raised a hand, silencing him. "I've said my part." She turned her gaze back to Amara, who sat silently, her nails digging into her palm beneath the table. The meeting went on, contracts discussed, signatures exchanged. Amara barely heard a word. Her ears still rang with Evelyn's comment, echoing every whisper she had heard since childhood. Later that evening, when the guests had left, Amara retreated to the garden. The air smelled of roses and damp earth, but even the flowers seemed to mock her. She sat on a stone bench, pressing her hands together to stop them from trembling. Adrian appeared behind her, his footsteps measured. "You shouldn't take my mother's words personally," he said flatly. She turned to him, searching his face. "How can I not? She thinks I'm worthless." His expression hardened, but there was a flicker of something regret, pain, before it vanished. "My mother has high expectations. Don't let her get to you." Her throat tightened. "And what about you, Adrian? Do you also believe I'm worthless?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. He didn't answer. And in that silence, she had her answer. Amara rose, straightened her shoulders, and walked past him back into the mansion. Inside, her heart was breaking, but her face showed none of it. That night, lying alone in her vast, cold bedroom, she whispered into the darkness, "Endure, Amara. Just endure." But deep in her chest, another voice whispered back, "How long before endurance turns into nothing at all?" The mansion was never quiet, yet for Amara it felt like silence followed her everywhere. There were always footsteps in the halls, clattering dishes in the kitchen, staff moving briskly with polite nods. But around her, conversation hushed, eyes dropped, and whispers began the moment she passed. She wasn't Adrian's wife in their eyes. She was the intruder. Days slipped into weeks, and Amara learned quickly, but loneliness inside a palace was sharper than loneliness in poverty. Back home, even when there wasn't enough food, there was laughter, there was noise, there was life. Here there were chandeliers, velvet drapes, crystal glasses, and yet the air felt colder than an empty winter street. Meals were the worst. The dining table stretched long, enough to seat 20, but there were only 2 chairs in use. Adrian's at the head, and hers near his side. Most mornings, she would sit, hands folded neatly, waiting for him. Sometimes he came, sometimes he didn't. When he did, his focus was on newspapers, business reports, or calls taken mid-bite. Once, someone encouraged, she asked, "Would you like me to join you at the charity gala this Saturday?" He didn't even look up. "It's not necessary." Her chest tightened. "But I am your wife." At that, his eyes flickered briefly, something unreadable crossing his face, before hardening again. "You don't need to parade yourself in front of people who will only judge." Her lips pressed together. He wasn't protecting her. He was protecting himself. That evening, she stood on the balcony outside her room, watching the city lights glitter like fallen stars. Somewhere down below, laughter drifted from the garden. Adrian's friends, loud and carefree. Glasses clinked, music swelled, and women's laughter rang louder than the rest. She saw him through the tall windows, surrounded, smiling in ways he never smiled at her. Her heart clenched. She turned away. The days stretched long. Amara filled them with little acts of survival, reading old books from the mansion library, tending to a neglected rosebush in the far corner of the garden, helping the housekeeper with tasks, though the woman insisted it wasn't her place. She needed to do something, anything, to feel alive. One afternoon, as she carefully pruned the roses, a maid passed by with another and whispered, "Not quietly enough. She's trying so hard to look useful. Poor thing doesn't know she'll never belong." The other giggled. "At least she's barren. Imagine if she had children, what a scandal." The words burned. Amara's hand slipped, and the thorn cut her finger deep. Blood welled, bright red against her skin. She sucked in a sharp breath but refused to cry. Instead, she pressed the wound to her dress and whispered fiercely to herself, "I belong, even if only to myself." That night, when Adrian returned late, his tie loosened and fatigue etched on his face, she dared to speak again. "You don't have to treat me like a stranger, Adrian. I'm not your enemy." He paused in the doorway, meeting her gaze at last. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped weariness, loneliness, something raw flashing in his eyes. But then he turned away, muttering, "Don't expect anything from me, Amara. This marriage isn't real." Her chest hollowed. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence that always bound her, but her voice failed. Instead, she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of his footsteps retreating to another room. It was in that silence she asked herself for the first time, what kind of life is this? And how long before silence breaks me completely? Adrian Cole had built his life on control. He controlled markets, contracts, boardrooms, and the image he projected to the world. What he could not control and what he resented most was the woman who now carried his last name. Not because she challenged him, but because her very presence was a reminder of a deal he never wanted. So, he resisted. He left before dawn most mornings, the sound of his polished shoes echoing against marble floors as he strode out. He returned long after midnight, when the mansion was asleep. When he was home, his attention was locked on glowing screens, endless documents, or calls that stretched into hours. Amara became a shadow in his life present, but never seen. At first, Amara tried to bridge the gap. She would prepare his favorite tea after dinner, learned from the housekeeper who'd mentioned it casually. She'd leave it by his study door, only to find the cup untouched hours later. The tea cold. Once, she dared to step into the study itself, setting the tray on his desk. "Adrian," she began softly, "you've been working all night. At least drink something warm." His pen didn't pause. "I'm fine." She lingered, her hands twisting together. "You don't always have to do everything alone." His eyes lifted then, sharp and unreadable. "And you don't have to pretend this is a real marriage." The word struck like a blade. She set the cup down, nodded once, and left without replying. From that night forward, she stopped bringing tea. But silence, she discovered, could grow louder than words. At meals, she stopped trying to fill the air with conversation. If he wanted silence, she would give him silence. The more she retreated inward, the more she realized something. Endurance was not strength when it made you invisible. One evening she heard voices in the grand hall. Adrian's friends had come, their laughter spilling through the corridors. Amara stood at the top of the staircase, watching as elegant women in shimmering gowns circled him like moths around a flame. He smiled at them, offered them drinks, listened intently to their chatter. For the first time, anger flickered in her chest, not just sadness, but a sharp, burning anger. Not because of jealousy, but because she realized he could give warmth, smiles, laughter just, not to her. The next morning she confronted him, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "You have no problem entertaining others. Why do you treat me as though I don't exist?" He froze mid-step, then turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Because I never asked for this, Amara. I never asked for you." Her breath caught. "And, do you think I asked for this? Do you think I wanted to be forced into your world, mocked and humiliated for something I didn't choose?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his coat and left, the door slamming behind him. Amara stood alone in the foyer, her heart pounding. For the first time, she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered fiercely to herself, "I will not disappear. Even if he refuses to see me, I will not vanish." That night, she didn't wait for him. She locked her bedroom door and prayed not for his love, but for the strength to keep her spirit intact. But deep down, she wondered, how much longer can I fight alone? The invitation came on thick ivory paper, embossed with gold lettering. The annual charity gala, hosted by the Cole Foundation. Amara found it in the morning mail pile, her name written neatly beneath Adrian's. She held it in her hands longer than she should have, her stomach tightening. Public events meant one thing: pretense. She would have to stand by his side, wear the mask of a dutiful wife, smile as if the cold distance between them didn't exist. When Adrian saw the card later, he barely glanced at it. "Be ready by 7. Black gown. The driver will pick us up." That was it. No discussion, no choice. On the night of the gala, Amara stood before the mirror, the gown a deep shade of sapphire that set off her dark skin like starlight against the night. Her hair was pulled back in a graceful bun, a touch of silver jewelry at her ears. She looked different. Not the invisible wife who drifted through empty halls, but someone who could belong in the dazzling world Adrian commanded. When Adrian entered the room to collect her, he stopped for the briefest of moments. His eyes flickered not with warmth, but with something unreadable. She noticed it, even if he quickly masked it with indifference. "Let's go," he said, offering his arm. The gala shimmered with chandeliers and soft music, the air buzzing with money and influence. Cameras flashed as soon as they stepped onto the red carpet. "Mr. Cole? Over here. Smile with your wife." Adrian's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around hers, pulling her closer. His smile was practiced, polished, perfect. Amara forced hers to match. For the first time in months, they looked like a couple. But behind the performance, tension hummed. His grip was firm, too firm, a silent warning. Do not slip. Do not speak out of place. Inside, the dance of appearances continued. Businessmen congratulated Adrian. Socialites whispered about Amara's beauty. Others eyed her with thinly veiled suspicion. She felt like a diamond placed in the wrong setting, admired, yet not truly accepted. At one point, Adrian's mother approached, her lips curling in polite disdain. "Amara, at least you clean up well." Before Amara could respond, Adrian spoke. "Mother, enough." His tone was sharp, leaving the older woman blinking in surprise. It was the first time he had ever defended her, even if only slightly. Later, during a slow waltz, Adrian extended his hand. "Appearances," he murmured. Amara placed her hand in his, and they moved across the floor. Their steps were precise, mechanical at first. But as the music swelled, something strange happened. Her body remembered how to move with his, how to flow as if they had rehearsed for years. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. It was not warmth, not yet, but it was recognition. The moment shattered when a woman in a red dress approached afterward, brushing her hand against Adrian's arm with familiarity. "Adrian, darling, it's been too long." Amara's stomach clenched. She stepped back, letting the two speak, her smile fixed in place. The woman's eyes flicked toward her with casual dismissal, as though she were nothing more than decoration. That night, when the cameras were gone and the mansion's silence wrapped around them again, Amara finally spoke. "You can parade me in front of the world, but when we come home, you vanish. Tell me, Adrian, am I only useful when people are watching?" For the first time, he didn't have an immediate answer. His silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he said, almost coldly, "You wouldn't understand." Her eyes burned, but she held his gaze. "Then make me understand, or stop pretending I don't exist." She left him in the foyer, her gown trailing like a wounded shadow. Upstairs, she lay awake, wondering if the moment on the dance floor had been real or just another illusion of forced proximity. The days after the gala were colder than before. Adrian buried himself deeper into work, but something in his eyes had shifted since that dance. Amara noticed it when he lingered at the breakfast table one morning, silent but watching her stir her tea. He said nothing, only rose after a few minutes and disappeared into his office. It was maddening, like he was torn between walls he had built and a door he was afraid to open. But while Adrian wrestled with his silence, others around them sharpened their knives. His mother began dropping by more often, each visit a storm disguised as courtesy. "I heard your wife refused to mingle with the board members' wives at the gala," she said one afternoon, her voice carrying down the marble hall. "Adrian, you mustn't let her embarrass you. Appearances are everything." Amara, passing by, froze at the edge of the room. Her heart clenched, but before she could retreat, Adrian replied. She didn't embarrass anyone. She handled herself better than most. The defense was subtle, but it unsettled both women in different ways. His mother's lips pressed thin. Amara's eyes stung with a flicker of hope she dared not trust. That hope soured days later when whispers from the staff reached her ears. Adrian had been spotted at lunch with the woman in red, the same one who had touched his arm so familiarly at the gala. Jealousy was not an emotion Amara often allowed herself. But that night, as Adrian entered the mansion late, smelling faintly of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Do you think I don't hear the whispers? Do you think I don't notice when you come home carrying someone else's scent?" Adrian froze by the door, his jaw tightening. It was business. She let out a bitter laugh. "Business doesn't leave lipstick on your cuff, Adrian." His eyes darkened, not with guilt, but with anger. "Careful, Amara. You wanted honesty? The truth is, I don't owe you explanations. This marriage was never about love." Her chest rose and fell, fury mixing with heartbreak. "Then why parade me around as your wife? Why keep me here at all if I'm nothing to you?" For a moment, his mask slipped. Beneath the anger was something else, fear maybe, or pain. But he turned away, leaving her standing alone in the hall, her fists clenched at her sides. The tension spilled into the next days like cracks spreading across glass. At a dinner party hosted by one of Adrian's business associates, Amara accidentally overheard a cruel remark from a guest. "She's Barren, isn't she? A shame for the Cole name." The words sliced through her. She excused herself, rushing to the garden outside, her breath ragged. When Adrian eventually found her, his face was unreadable. "Why did you run?" he asked. "Because I'm tired of being your flaw," she whispered. "Tired of being the reason people mock you." For once, he didn't snap back. He only stared at her, something unspoken burning in his gaze. But silence, once again, became his weapon. Amara turned from him, tears streaking her cheeks. "If he cannot see my worth now, will he ever?" That night, she resolved something quietly in her heart. She would endure, but she would no longer beg. The house was too quiet that night. After the bitter argument, Adrian had retreated into his study, and Amara wandered aimlessly through the halls, her hands brushing along the cold marble as though searching for warmth. She ended up in the library, a place she rarely entered. The shelves stretched high, filled with books that smelled of old paper and dust. She sank into one of the armchairs, her body heavy with exhaustion, and for the first time in months, she allowed her thoughts to drift backward toward the life she had before Adrian Cole. It was not a life of riches. It was one of survival. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table after Amara's father died in an accident. Amara had learned early what sacrifice meant, selling her own school lunch Sundays so her younger brother could eat. When her mother fell sick, Amara had been forced to drop out of college, her dreams of becoming a teacher dissolving into hospital bills. And then came the whispers. The pitying glances. The failed attempts at love. The young man she had once loved deeply walked away when doctors told them her chances of conceiving were slim. "I want a family," he had said, as though Amara herself was not enough. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. Adrian's marriage offer, or rather, his family's forced arrangement had not been salvation. It was another kind of prison, gilded and suffocating. But she had accepted it, because the money promised to her mother's care could not be refused. Love had no place in that decision, duty did. She closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her face. I was never chosen for love. Always for necessity. Always for what I could provide or what people thought I lacked. What she didn't realize was that Adrian stood just beyond the library door. He had come searching for a document, but when he heard her soft voice murmuring into the stillness, he froze. He listened. Her pain, spoken aloud to no one, pierced through the walls he had built around himself. He had always thought of her as strong, unshakable, quietly resilient. He had never considered the weight she carried, the scars hidden beneath her calm surface. For a long moment, he stood there, torn between leaving and stepping inside. His pride told him to walk away. His heart buried, though it was urged him forward. But in the end, Adrian did nothing. He left silently, his footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet. The next morning, however, something subtle had changed. At breakfast, when Amara reached for the teapot, she noticed another cup already set at her side. Adrian's cup. She blinked in surprise, looking up to see him flipping through the newspaper. "You made me tea?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He didn't look at her, but his tone was quieter than usual. It seemed appropriate. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like the first crack of light breaking through stone. Amara sipped her tea slowly, her mind circling back to the painful truth she had whispered the night before. If he only knew everything, would it change anything? Or would it make me even less in his eyes? The morning after Adrian set the extra teacup for Amara, the mansion felt different. The silence was still there, but it wasn't as heavy. It was as though some invisible thread had shifted between them. Amara noticed him watching her more often. Not openly, never openly, but when she turned suddenly, she'd catch his gaze before he looked away. At dinner, he didn't eat in his study as usual. He sat across from her at the long table. They ate mostly in silence, but for the first time, it didn't feel hostile. One evening, a storm swept across the city. Rain battered against the windows, thunder rolling like distant drums. The power flickered, then went out, plunging the mansion into darkness. Amara lit a few candles from the kitchen and carried them to the sitting room. She found Adrian there, his phone dead in his hand, irritation etched across his face. "Generators down," he muttered. "Then maybe," she said softly, setting the candles on the table, "we do what people used to do when the lights went out." He raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" She smiled faintly. "Talk." The word seemed foreign to him, but he didn't leave. Instead, he sat, watching the candlelight flicker across her face. The storm outside softened the walls between them. They spoke, hesitantly at first. About small things, how she loved the smell of rain, how he hated it because it reminded him of funerals, how she once dreamed of teaching children, how he once dreamed of escaping the shadow of his father. At one point she laughed at something he said, not a polite laugh, but a genuine one that startled them both. The sound filled the room, warm and unrestrained. Adrian stared at her, and for the first time in 3 years, something in his chest shifted. Later, when the storm had passed and the lights flickered back on, they both blinked against the sudden brightness. The spell broke, but not completely. The next morning, Amara found a book on the breakfast table. A teaching manual, old but carefully chosen. Adrian didn't say it was from him, but she knew. Her fingers lingered on the cover, her chest tightening. She looked at him across the table, but he only sipped his coffee as if nothing had changed. Yet something had. Days later, while walking through the garden, she stumbled on loose stones and nearly fell. Adrian caught her by the arm, steadying her. His touch was firm, grounding. For a heartbeat, they stood close, eyes meeting. Neither pulled away immediately. "I'm fine," she whispered. He released her, but his voice was quieter than usual. "Be careful." That night, as she lay in bed, Amara turned his words over in her mind. It wasn't love. It wasn't even tenderness. But it was something, a fragile thread of care forming where only coldness had lived. And though she didn't dare hope too much, she clung to it. Because for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely invisible. The fragile truce between Adrian and Amara didn't go unnoticed. The Cole mansion, always buzzing with staff and visitors, had eyes everywhere. Whispers spread quietly, "Mr. Cole lingered at breakfast. He defended his wife again. They almost looked close. But with whispers came watchful enemies. Adrian's mother was the first to act. One afternoon she arrived unannounced, her pearls gleaming and her tone sharp. Amara was in the garden, kneeling to tend roses, when the older woman approached. "Still playing the part of dutiful wife, I see," she said coldly. "Don't fool yourself, dear. A few smiles and cups of tea won't change what you are." Amara froze, her fingers tightening around the pruning shears. "And what am I, Mrs. Cole?" The woman's lips curled. "Barren. Temporary. Replaceable." The words sliced deep, reopening wounds Amara had tried to close. But she forced herself to stand, her back straight. "Temporary or not, I am still here, and I will not disappear simply because you wish it." For a flicker of a moment, Adrian's mother faltered, but her eyes hardened again. "We'll see." As if on cue, complications multiplied. That same week, Adrian's company faced a brewing scandal. A rival corporation accused Cole Enterprises of manipulating shares. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing whenever Adrian stepped outside. The pressure mounted, and Adrian's tempo grew sharper by the day. "You don't understand the stakes," he snapped one night when Amara tried to ask about the news. "Then make me understand," she replied softly. "I'm not your enemy, Adrian." But he didn't answer. He slammed his study door, retreating into solitude once more. To make matters worse, the woman in red, Cassandra Hart, a glamorous investor with ties to Adrian's empire, appeared like a storm. She began attending meetings, visiting the mansion under the guise of business. Her presence stirred old insecurities in Amara. One evening, Amara passed the drawing room and saw Cassandra leaning close to Adrian, her laugh tinkling like glass. Adrian wasn't smiling, but he wasn't pulling away either. The sight twisted Amara's chest. She turned quickly, not wanting to hear more, but Cassandra's voice followed her out. "Some people just don't belong in this world, Adrian. You know it." Amara walked faster, her steps echoing down the marble hall, her vision blurring. That night, she packed a small bag. She wasn't leaving, not yet, but she needed the reminder that she had a choice, that she wasn't as trapped as everyone wanted her to believe. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine life beyond the gilded prison life, where she could teach again, laugh again, maybe even love again without chains. But before she could act, another complication struck. Her mother fell gravely ill. The call came late one night, her brother's voice shaking on the phone. "She's asking for you, Amara. Please come home." Amara's world tilted. For all the chaos in the Cole mansion, her mother was her anchor. Without her, the last thread of family she had left would vanish. She rushed to Adrian's study, breathless. "I need to go. My mother, she's in the hospital." Adrian looked up, startled by her desperation. For a moment, his mask cracked, concern flashing in his eyes. But then he closed the file in front of him and nodded. "I'll have the driver take you." It was the simplest of answers, but it carried weight. He hadn't questioned her. He hadn't dismissed her. He had only said yes. And for Amara, in that moment of chaos, it was enough. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Amara sat by her mother's bedside, holding her frail hand, whispering prayers between tears. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the steady beep of the monitor the only rhythm in the room. Adrian remained in the hallway, out of sight. He hadn't been asked to come, but he had. His presence was quiet, almost invisible, yet unshakable. Staff recognized him instantly. His name carried power, but here, he was just a man watching over his wife's grief. It was in that sterile corridor that Adrian's past began to bleed into the present. One evening, Amara stepped out of the room to find him seated in the waiting area, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. His face, so often unreadable, was drawn, his eyes shadowed. "You don't have to stay," she murmured. He glanced up, his voice low. "I know, but I remember what it's like." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" For a long time, he didn't answer. Then, with a heaviness she had never heard from him before, he spoke. "My father died in a hospital like this. I was 16. He was larger than life, ruthless, demanding. Nothing I did was ever enough for him, and then suddenly he was gone." Amara lowered herself into the chair beside him, listening. "He built this empire with his fists, his will, his cruelty. And when he died, everyone expected me to step in, to be him, to be colder, sharper, harder, and I did." His jaw clenched. "Because if I didn't, the board would eat me alive. Our rivals would tear us apart. So I buried whatever was left of me and became what the world needed me to be." The confession spilled out, raw and jagged. Amara saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't just pride or arrogance. It was armor. Armor forged in grief and fear. Armor that had calcified until even he forgot there was a man beneath it. "Adrian," she whispered, her hand hovering before finally resting lightly on his. "No one is asking you to be your father." His eyes flickered to hers, something unguarded breaking through. "Aren't you?" The question hit her like a blow. She shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. "I never wanted a perfect man. I only wanted a human one." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Then a nurse approached with news about her mother, and the moment dissolved. But Amara carried his words with her back into the room, and Adrian carried hers like an echo he couldn't silence. That night, as he drove them home, the city lights flashing through the car windows, he finally admitted what had haunted him all along. "Love is dangerous," he said quietly, not looking at her. "It makes you weak. It gives people weapons against you. My father used to say that. I believed him." Amara turned to him, her eyes soft but unyielding. "Or maybe love is the only thing that makes you strong enough to survive all the rest." He didn't reply, but for the first time, Adrian Cole had no certainty, no polished shield of answers. Only silence, and the flicker of doubt that perhaps his father had been wrong. In the days after Amara's mother was discharged from the hospital, the mansion felt different. Not because its marble halls softened, but because something had shifted inside Adrian. The walls he had spent years building no longer seemed unbreakable. They had cracks through which small, unexpected gestures began to slip. One morning, Amara found him in the kitchen, of all places. He stood awkwardly in front of the stove, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. The smell of slightly burnt toast lingered in the air. "What on earth are you doing?" she asked, surprised into a laugh. He glanced over his shoulder, half defensive. "Trying to make breakfast. Isn't that what husbands do? Her eyebrows rose. Since when do you care about being a husband? He didn't answer, but when he handed her the plate toast a little charred, eggs slightly overcooked, his expression carried something unfamiliar. Humility. She tasted it, and though it was far from perfect, she smiled. Not bad. The faintest curve touched his lips, almost a smile. Their days began to fall into a new rhythm. He lingered longer at meals, sometimes even asking about her day. She found books left on her nightstand on teaching, on gardening, on topics he knew she loved. And one evening, as they walked through the garden together, he surprised her with a simple question. What would you have taught? She blinked at him. What? If you'd stayed in school. If life had been different. Her throat tightened. Children. Literature. I wanted to teach them how stories can heal, how they remind us we're not alone. He was quiet for a moment, then murmured, Maybe you're teaching me now. The words sank deep into her heart, leaving her breathless. But their bond was not built only on words. One night, when Amara woke from a nightmare, her mother's laboured breaths echoing in her mind, she stumbled into the hallway. Adrian was there, already awake, papers in hand. What's wrong? He asked, his voice sharper with concern than she had ever heard it. She shook her head, tears threatening. Just memories. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he reached out, pulling her gently into his arms. She stiffened, unaccustomed to the warmth of his embrace, but slowly she melted into it. Neither spoke. The silence was different, now not heavy, not cold, but sheltering. Later, as they parted, he whispered almost reluctantly, You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. Amara lay awake for hours that night, her heart aching in a way that was both painful and beautiful. For the first time, she let herself wonder, could he truly change? Could this marriage become more than a cage? Down the hall, Adrian sat in his study, staring at the papers before him, but seeing only her face. He had built his empire on power, but for the first time in years, he felt powerless and he didn't hate it. The warmth that had begun to bloom between them was fragile, like glass in a storm. And storms, as Amara knew too well, never stayed away for long. It happened on a night when Adrian was scheduled to meet with investors. Cassandra Hart was there, draped in scarlet silk, her hand resting on Adrian's arm as photographers snapped away. The images spread across tabloids before dawn, plastered with headlines. Cole Air and Cassandra Hart, power couple in the making? Where was his wife? Amara saw the photos on her phone at breakfast. Her chest constricted as if a fist had closed around it. The fragile hope she had been nurturing, the small smiles, the embrace in the hallway, the burnt toast chattered in an instant. When Adrian walked into the dining room, tie loosened, exhaustion etched across his face. She slammed the phone onto the table. Was it all a game to you? Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with fury. Was every gesture just another performance? He froze, his gaze flicking to the screen. The photograph stared back at them, cruel and undeniable. It's not what it looks like, he said, his voice clipped. Amara's laugh was sharp, bitter. Of course it isn't. It never is it? Something in his expression faltered, but pride rose like a shield. You think you know me, Amara? You don't. You see a picture and assume the worst. That says more about you than me. Her heart twisted. No, Adrian. It says everything about you that even when you begin to care, you still can't choose me. Not fully, not openly. For a moment she thought she saw pain flicker in his eyes. But instead of reaching for her, he turned away. I don't owe you explanations. The words were knives. That night, Amara packed her bag again, but this time, she placed it by the door. She stood there for a long while, her hand hovering over the knob, her tears falling freely. Upstairs, Adrian watched from the balcony, unseen. He wanted to call out, to stop her, to confess that Cassandra's presence had been nothing more than a ruthless business strategy. But his pride, his fear of vulnerability, bound his tongue. And so, He watched the woman he was beginning to love crumble under the weight of his silence. The next morning, Amara was gone. The mansion felt hollow without her laughter, her footsteps, her presence. For the first time in years, Adrian's empire felt like ashes in his hands. He had won every deal, silenced every rival, but lost the only battle that mattered. He sat alone in his study, a photograph from the paper lying torn in half on his desk. For the first time since his father's death, Adrian Cole felt the crushing weight of regret. And Amara, standing in her mother's modest home miles away, whispered into the night, "I will not be broken again." The days that followed were drenched in silence. For Amara, silence was not passive, it was the echo of everything she had lost. Back at her mother's home, she tried to convince herself that she was free. She cooked simple meals, walked the familiar streets, and read old books she once loved. Yet nothing felt whole. At night, she dreamed of the mansion's long corridors, not because she missed the wealth, but because she missed the way Adrian's eyes softened when he wasn't watching himself. She missed the unspoken warmth of his arms the night of her nightmare. She hated herself for missing him, but the ache was relentless. Her mother noticed. "Child," she said one evening, "you can leave a house, but you can't leave your heart behind, not unless you face what's truly inside it." Amara's eyes stung. "And what if my heart is foolish?" "Then it's human," her mother whispered. Meanwhile, Adrian drowned himself in work. His days stretched long, filled with meetings and deals, but nothing dulled the gnawing emptiness. Cassandra Hart lingered around the edges, smiling her predator's smile, but for the first time, Adrian saw her for what she was, an echo of the man he used to be, ambitious, cold, willing to sacrifice anyone for power. The investors noticed his distraction. At one meeting, a partner asked bluntly, "Is everything all right, Cole? You don't look like the man who used to terrify boardrooms." Adrian forced a smile, but inside, the words cut deep. He had built a fortress of control his whole life, but Amara had walked in and lit a flame. And when she left, she carried that flame with her, leaving only darkness behind. One night, unable to bear the silence of the mansion, Adrian went into the garden. The moonlight reflected off the fountain where Amara once sat, telling him about her dreams of teaching children. He stood there, gripping the stone edge until his knuckles whitened. "You fool," he muttered to himself. "You had her, and you let her walk away." But pride still lingered, whispering that it was her fault for leaving, that she hadn't trusted him enough. Yet beneath that voice was another quieter but stronger. You didn't fight for her. You didn't choose her when it mattered. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole wept. Across town, Amara lay awake, the faint sounds of crickets outside her window. Her hand rested on her stomach unconsciously, as though already protecting the life she didn't yet know she carried. In the darkness, her whisper cracked, "Why does it hurt so much to love him?" It was a week after Amara left when the knock came at her mother's door. She opened it, expecting a neighbor, but instead, she found Danielle, the janitor's son she'd grown up with, now working as a mechanic in town. "Amara," he said, his voice full of warmth and worry, "I saw the papers. I just wanted to check on you." His concern was genuine, and for the first time in days, Amara felt safe enough to exhale. They walked together to the old park where they used to play as children, the air filled with the rustle of leaves. "You know," Daniel said, tossing a pebble into the pond, "I used to think love was supposed to be easy. Two people meet, they fit, the end. But maybe love is less about fitting and more about fighting." Amara frowned. "Fighting? Yeah. Fighting your pride, your fears, the lies people tell you about yourself. Fighting for the person when it'd be easier to walk away." The words struck her like a chord. Had she walked away too soon? Or had Adrian let her go because he wasn't willing to fight for her? Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Adrian found his own helping hand in the most unlikely place: his younger sister, Elise. She hadn't spoken to him much since their father's funeral, disapproving of the way he had turned into a man of steel. But that night, she showed up at the mansion unannounced. "You look like hell," she said, her sharp eyes softening as she took in his hollow expression. Adrian tried to wave her off, but Elise crossed her arms. "Don't even try it. I know what's going on. You messed things up with your wife." He stiffened. "It's complicated." "It's simple," she shot back. "You hurt her, she left, and now you're sitting here pretending work will fill the hole she left. It won't. You're miserable, Adrian, and for once in your life, you can't buy your way out." Her bluntness pierced through him. He sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "I don't know how to fix it." Elise's expression softened. "Start by being human. Stop hiding behind power and pride. Tell her the truth. Fight for her. Isn't she worth that?" Her words echoed the same lesson Daniel had unknowingly given Amara. That love required a fight, a surrender of ego, and a choice. That night, both Amara and Adrian lay awake in different homes, haunted by the same question: will I fight, or will I let go forever? Amara sat at her mother's kitchen table late into the night, the dim light casting long shadows across the worn wood. In front of her lay a notebook she hadn't touched in years, its pages yellowed, edges frayed. It was the journal she had once used to scribble lesson plans for her dream classroom. She opened it, reading the old notes with trembling hands. Ideas for teaching stories of courage, forgiveness, redemption. Words that had once filled her with hope now pressed against her chest like a mirror. How could she teach forgiveness if she couldn't offer it herself? How could she preach redemption when she hadn't believed Adrian capable of change? Her mother entered quietly, wrapping a shawl around Amara's shoulders. "Still awake?" "I don't know what to do, Mama," Amara whispered. "He hurt me. But I hurt too, because I miss him." Her mother's eyes were gentle. "Love is not the absence of pain, child. Sometimes it's the courage to walk through pain together. The question is, does he want to walk with you?" Amara lowered her gaze, tears falling onto the pages of her journal. She realized then that her fear had always been greater than her hope. And fear had driven her choices more than love ever did. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Adrian sat alone in his father's old study. The room smelled faintly of leather and cigar smoke, a relic of the man whose shadow he had never escaped. He poured a glass of whiskey but didn't drink, staring instead at the family portrait on the wall. His father, rigid and cold. His mother, frail and fading himself as a boy, eyes wide but dimming. For years he had vowed never to be weak like his mother, never to be crushed like her. Strength had become his armor, pride his shield. But Amara had cracked both open with nothing more than her honesty, her defiance, her quiet grace. He whispered into the empty room, "I don't want to be him, not anymore." The admission startled him, but it was true. For the first time, Adrian saw his choices clearly. He could cling to the empire he had built on power and fear, or he could reach for something far more terrifying: love that demanded vulnerability. Elise's words echoed in his mind. Start by being human. Stop hiding behind pride. Tell her the truth. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, prayed. Not for success, not for victory, but for the strength to be the man Amara deserved. At that same hour, Amara whispered her own prayer, her voice breaking. "God, if there's still something left in him worth loving, show me. Because I don't know if I can walk away forever." Two souls divided by distance, but kneeling in the same posture of surrender. And in that quiet, both of them knew. The time for running had ended. The morning sun spilled over the horizon, washing the sky in pink and gold. Amara stood by the window of her mother's small home, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She hadn't slept. Her journal lay open on the table behind her, its words circling her heart like whispers. Forgiveness, redemption, courage. She knew what she needed to do. But fear clawed at her chest. What if he hadn't changed? What if returning only meant reopening the wound? Sometimes, her mother said softly, stepping into the kitchen. You don't wait for certainty. You choose, and the choice shapes what comes next. Amara nodded, wiping at her eyes. She decided then she would not live in fear anymore. If Adrian wanted to fight, she would meet him halfway. And if he didn't then, at least she would know she had chosen love, not silence. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his car outside Amara's mother's house, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He had been there for nearly an hour, rehearsing what he would say. He had never begged anyone in his life, never admitted weakness. But for her, he would strip himself bare. Finally, he stepped out, the crunch of gravel under his shoes startling the quiet morning. His chest pounded as he raised his hand to knock only for the door to open before he could. Amara stood there, equally stunned. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Their eyes met, and the weight of 3 years of pain, pride, and fragile hope filled the space between them. It was Adrian who broke first. Amara, his voice cracked. He took a step closer, his eyes raw, stripped of every layer of arrogance. I was wrong. About everything. I thought strength meant control. But you showed me that real strength is loving even when it terrifies you. And I was too proud, too blind to see it. Her throat tightened, tears spilling freely now. Why should I believe you, Adrian, after all the times you let me down, all the times you let me feel like I was nothing? He dropped to his knees on the doorstep, his voice trembling. Because I'm done letting fear rule me. I don't care about the empire, or the investors, or Cassandra's lies. None of it matters if I don't have you. I choose you, Amara. I will fight for you if you'll let me. Amara covered her mouth, sobs racking her body. For years she had prayed for this moment, doubted it would ever come. And yet here he was not the cold billionaire, but a man stripped bare, begging not for power, but for love. Slowly she reached down, her hand trembling, and lifted his chin. Their eyes locked, and in that silence she saw the truth. He had finally chosen. Then fight with me, she whispered. Not just for me, but for us. Adrian nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Always. The air between them shifted after that morning on the doorstep. It wasn't as if years of hurt dissolved overnight, but something undeniable had broken open. For the first time, there was honesty not forced by circumstance, not cloaked in pride, but freely given. Adrian stayed for tea that morning. He sat awkwardly at Amara's mother's small table, so different from the grand dining halls he was used to. The porcelain cups were chipped, the bread homemade, but he ate every bite with reverence. Amara watched him, her heart aching at the strangeness of seeing a man so powerful look so ordinary. At one point her mother excused herself, leaving them alone. Adrian cleared his throat. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I don't even expect you to trust me yet. But if you'll allow me, I want to earn it every day. Amara looked down at her tea, the steam fogging her lashes. Trust isn't a gift, Adrian. It's something you broke, and I don't know if I can glue the pieces back together. He leaned forward, his voice low. Then let me be the glue. Let me hold the broken pieces until they feel whole again. Her heart clenched. She didn't answer, but she didn't push him away either. That silence, heavy but alive, was its own beginning. Over the next few days, Adrian returned, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but his presence. He drove Amara and her mother to doctor's appointments, carried bags without being asked, and even fixed the broken railing on their porch with his own hands. Each gesture chipped away at the wall around Amara's heart. She tried to resist, but when she caught him laughing with her mother in the kitchen, real, unguarded laughter, her chest warmed in ways she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Adrian found Amara sitting on the porch steps, her journal open in her lap. He sat beside her, careful not to intrude. What are you writing? He asked softly. She hesitated, then closed the book. Dreams. I used to think they were dead, but maybe they were just waiting. He looked at her, his expression tender. Let me be part of them this time, whatever they are. Her breath caught. And if I dream of leaving all this wealth behind, of living a simple life, then I'll follow you, he said without hesitation. I'd trade every dollar I have if it means I get to walk beside you. For the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to lean against him, her head resting on his shoulder. They sat in silence, the world hushed around them, as the fragile seed of trust began to take root again. In her heart, she whispered, "Maybe love can grow again even here, even now." Just when the fragile threads of trust began to weave between them, the world outside threatened to tear them apart. It started with Cassandra Hart. Humiliated by Adrian's rejection, she launched a smear campaign. Headlines erupted. Adrian Cole abandons billion-dollar deal for small-town mistress. Cole heirs empire at risk, investors flee over scandal. The tabloids twisted photos of Amara leaving the hospital with her mother, painting her as a gold digger manipulating a grieving billionaire. Amara's hands shook as she held the newspaper. This is what I was afraid of, Adrian. That loving you would mean losing myself all over again. Adrian clenched his fists. She's lying. I'll crush her if I have to. But Amara stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. No, that's exactly the man I don't want you to be, the man who uses power to destroy. If this is how you fight, then we'll never survive. Her words hit him harder than any business rival ever could. For the first time since their reconciliation, the distance between them yawned open again. As if that weren't enough, another blow. Kamehi's board of directors demanded he cut ties with Amara to save the company's reputation. One investor even said, "She's a liability, Adrian. Choose wisely your wife or your empire." He left the meeting, his chest heavy, knowing the choice would define not only his future, but theirs. That evening he found Amara in the garden outside her mother's home, her journal open, tears staining the page. "Adrian," she whispered, voice trembling, "I can't go through being your shame again. If you choose me, it has to be fully, openly. I won't survive being hidden in the shadows." He reached for her, his hands shaking. "I'm scared, Amara. Not of losing the company, but of not being enough for you even if I give it all up." Her gaze softened, but her words were steady. "Then this is the last test, Adrian. Not against me, but against yourself. Will you let fear define you again, or will you choose love, no matter the cost?" The air between them was thick, trembling with the weight of the choice yet to come. The next morning, Adrian walked into the boardroom where investors waited, their faces carved with judgment. Cameras flashed outside the glass doors, reporters hungry for his downfall. Cassandra Hart lounged at the far end of the table, smug and radiant in her power. Adrian adjusted his tie, but for once, he wasn't hiding behind it. His voice, steady but fierce, cut through the murmurs. "You've all made it clear, my marriage is bad for business. But here's the truth without her, I don't care about business." Gasps rippled around the room. Cassandra's smile faltered. Adrian continued, "I spent years building an empire my father would approve of, cold, ruthless, unyielding, that I refuse to live another day in his shadow. I choose Amara. I choose love, and if that means losing every calm, dime I have, so be it." The silence that followed was electric. Cassandra rose, furious. "You'll regret this, Adrian. She'll drag you down, and when she does, don't come crawling back." He met her glare, unflinching. "No, Cassandra. The only regret I ever had was not choosing her sooner." He walked out, leaving stunned investors and a crumbling alliance behind him. That evening, Adrian drove straight to Amara's mother's home. She was on the porch, her journal in hand, when he arrived. He didn't speak at first, just dropped a thick folder into her lap. Inside were the legal papers, announcing his resignation from half the board and the dissolution of the deal with Cassandra Hart. Amara's eyes widened. You gave it up?" "I didn't give anything up," he said, kneeling before her, voice trembling with conviction. "I gained everything. Amara, I've lived in fear all my life, fear of weakness, fear of love, but you taught me that real strength isn't in controlling the world, it's in opening my heart, and I'm done being afraid." I see. Tears blurred her vision. "Adrian," he cupped her hands. "I choose you, fully, publicly, eternally. And if you'll have me, I want to start again, not as your captor, not as your mistake, but as your husband." For a long moment, she said nothing, the only sound the chirping of crickets in the twilight. Then, slowly, she closed the journal and whispered, "You fought for me." His forehead pressed to hers. Always, and for the first time in 3 years, Amara kissed him not out of duty, not out of confusion, but out of love. It was soft, trembling, but alive with promise. The breakthrough had come not through power, but through surrender. 3 years later, the Cole estate looked nothing like it once had. The cold marble halls were softened with children's laughter, the walls lined with drawings taped at crooked angles. The vast, echoing mansion that had once felt like a prison was now alive with chaos, warmth, and love. On the back lawn, Adrian knelt as 3 small figures tumbled toward him, identical triplets, their giggles piercing the air like music. "Papa, catch me!" one shouted, leaping into his arms. Another clung to his back while the third tried to steal the pen from his pocket. Adrian laughed, his once stern face unrecognizable in its joy. All right, you win. Papa surrenders." From the porch, Amara watched, her hand resting on the railing. Her eyes shone with tears, not of pain this time, but of gratitude. She remembered the girl who had been forced into this marriage, barren and broken in the world's eyes. And now, here she stood, mother to 3 miracles, wife to a man who had laid down his pride for love. Her mother joined her, smiling as she watched the scene unfold. "You see, child, the barren tree bloomed after all." Amara's throat tightened. "Yes, Mama. It bloomed brighter than I ever dreamed." Down in the grass, Adrian looked up at his wife, his expression soft. He still bore the scars of the empire he had rebuilt from scratch, smaller now, humbler, but stronger in ways the old one never was. He no longer sought to rule the world. His kingdom was here, in the family he had once been too afraid to believe in. Elise, his sister, arrived with Daniel, who carried tools from the car. Together they were fixing the greenhouse Adrian had built for Amara, a place where she could teach neighborhood children to read and plant seeds in the soil, mirroring the lessons she had once dreamed of giving in a classroom. "You've got quite the life here, brother," Elise teased as she set down a tray of lemonade. "And to think, you almost threw it away." Adrian smiled, pulling one of the triplets into his lap. "Almost. But love saved me," Daniel chuckled. "Or maybe she did." He nodded toward Amara, who was now guiding the other 2 children toward the garden. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Adrian and Amara sat on the porch steps, the triplets asleep upstairs. The air was filled with the soft hum of crickets, the world wrapped in peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Amara asked quietly. He turned to her, brow furrowed. "Regret what?" "Choosing me over the empire, the deals, the life you once thought mattered." Adrian took her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Amara, I didn't give up anything. I found everything. And I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never thought we'd come this far. That the girl who was forced into a marriage would end up finding love within it. And I never thought the man who had everything would realize he was nothing without the woman he almost lost." He replied softly. They sat in silence, the weight of their journey pressing on them, not heavy, but holy. Every scar, every tear, every moment of breaking had brought them here, to this wholeness neither had dared to dream of. Amara leaned against him, whispering into the night, "We made it." And Adrian, his arm wrapped around her, whispered back, "Forever." The barren girl had bloomed. The cold billionaire had melted. And together they had built a love that no storm could ever shatter again. Amara, once poor and barren, becomes a mother of triplets and a teacher of children. Adrian, once a prideful billionaire, becomes a humble husband and father who chose love over power. What began as a forced union ends as a chosen, joyful family. My beautiful family, love is not about control or perfection. It is about humility, forgiveness, and the courage to fight for one another when it matters most. If you were in Amara's place, wounded but offered a second chance, would you have chosen to forgive? Or would you have walked away forever? Share your heart in the comments.
Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this one, then you'll absolutely love the next. It's even crazier and more captivating than you can imagine. So go ahead and click the video showing right here on your screen, and I'll see you in the next story.